right, welcome to screencast number 2 for Unit 9, Lesson 1. I'm on page 498. What determines where a population can live in an ecosystem? Remember that a population is many individuals of the same species. Well, not all populations can live in the same part of an ecosystem. Different species need different foods or different environmental conditions. Every population has a different place to live and a different role to play in the ecosystem. So let's talk about habitat and niche, or some people say niche, whatever. Habitat. A habitat is where a population lives in an ecosystem. A habitat can be as large as an entire lake or as small as the leaf on a cattail in that lake. Population's habitat often depends on abiotic factors, meaning non-living factors. For example, ferns might live in wet soil in a forest ecosystem. Pine trees may live in drier soil in that same ecosystem. A population's habitat can also depend on biotic factors. Squirrel monkeys, for instance, like the ones above, find food and shelter in the trees of a tropical rainforest ecosystem, so trees are part of their habitat. And then niche or niche. A niche is the role of a population in that community. So what role does that particular population play in its community? A population's niche includes its interactions with other populations, meaning populations of other species. It also includes the biotic and abiotic factors the population needs to survive. For example, sea anemones occupy a niche in that sunny, warm water area of a coral reef. They attach themselves to rocks or coral, and when a fish comes close enough, they sting the fish with their tentacles and eat it. Interactions with coral and fish and the warm, sunny conditions they need to survive are all part of the niche of sea anemones. Let's look at page 499. Why does competition occur in an ecosystem? In an ecosystem, organisms may compete for the same biotic or abiotic resource. Competition can happen between members of the same species or between members of different species. It can happen between individuals or between entire populations. Competition can be direct or indirect. If it's direct competition, then the two organisms that are competing are actually coming into physical contact with each other. For instance, the two bighorn sheep competing for a mate in the picture, and a hawk and an owl hunting for the same kind of animal are in competition, often in indirect competition, meaning that they're not interacting with one another, but they are seeking the same resource. Okay? Well, competition occurs because ecosystems have limited resources. So I'm down at the red heading where it says resources are limited. Okay, competition occurs because ecosystems have limited resources. For example, animals such as barnacles and sea stars may compete for the limited space on rocks in a tidal pool. They're competing for the same location. Plants on the floor of a tropical rainforest may compete for the small amount of sunlight that can pass through the dense canopy of trees. Flying squirrels and gray squirrels may compete for acorns in the same oak forest, etc. Okay? But the main thing to realize is that competition occurs because there's not enough to go around for everybody. Resources are limited. I'm now on page 500, and I'm looking at the blue heading that says, how do organisms get energy? You eat certain foods because you like them, but food is about more than just taste. Food gives you the energy that you need to grow and develop. Your body changes food into chemical energy needed to fuel important life processes. All organisms need energy to survive, but they get their energy from different sources and do it in different ways. Some organisms eat plants. Some organisms eat animals that have eaten those plants. Some organisms don't eat anything. Organisms that do not eat make their own food using energy from their surroundings. And in most cases, the energy that they're using is the sunlight. All right, so let's talk about the different types of organisms as we classify them based on how they are obtaining the energy that they need. Producers convert energy into food. A producer makes food by using energy from its surroundings. Most producers use energy from the sun to make food through a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process where a producer will take sunlight and use the energy in sunlight to change carbon dioxide and water into sugar, glucose, and oxygen. Okay? The sugars that are made through the process of photosynthesis help to fuel the cell processes that the plant needs to do. Green plants and algae are examples of producers that use photosynthesis. Now, there are a few producers that use a different process called chemosynthesis, but we won't get into chemosynthesis much at all. If you can remember photosynthesis, you're probably good to go. Okay, so most producers make their own food through a process known as photosynthesis. Decomposers are another type of organism based on how they get their energy. A decomposer gets energy by breaking down organic matter. Decomposers live in soil or on rotting logs in a forest, for instance. Fungi, bacteria, and earthworms are all decomposers. Decomposers play a really important role in the ecosystem because as they break down wastes or dead organisms, the decomposers return those nutrients to the soil where they can be recycled. Scavengers are sometimes classified as decomposers. Scavengers are animals that feed on dead animals. Vultures, raccoons, things like that are examples of scavengers. Then we've got a third category, and really sometimes even people categorize your scavengers and whatnot as consumers. Consumers eat other organisms. Okay, a consumer gets energy by eating other organisms. You are a consumer because you obtain your energy by eating other things, either plant matter or animal matter. You either eat meat, vegetables, fruit, what have you. Okay, a consumer gets energy by eating other organisms, and there are different types of consumers. A herbivore, such as a deer, eats plants only. An omnivore, such as a grizzly bear, eats both plants and animals. A carnivore, such as a shark, only eats other animals. It doesn't go into specifics here, but there are some more specifics. Like if I said insectivore, that would be a consumer that eats, that lives off of eating bugs primarily, that kind of thing. So there are other types, but those are the three big types. The predator-prey relationship is a common feeding relationship in an ecosystem. A predator is an animal that kills and eats all or part of another animal. Okay? The prey is the animal that is killed and eaten. Okay? Predators in ecosystems include things like lions, wolves, sharks, birds, certain birds, such as the kingfisher, which is the one that they show you on page 501. Prey include things like zebras, rabbits, mice, insects, fish, all sorts of stuff. If it is something that is killed and eaten, it's prey. If it is an organism that is doing the killing and eating, that is a predator. Now, many animals can wind up being a predator and a prey both. Okay? For example, a trout is a predator that eats insects, but a trout can also be prey to a bald eagle. So, for instance, the trout would eat insects. So in that case, the insects are prey and the trout's a predator. But then the bald eagle can fly along and eat the trout, which means the trout, in this case, is the prey and the bald eagle is the predator. Okay, so it just kind of depends. A lot of times there are situations where both applies. Okay, before you move on to the next screencast, please take a minute and add these notes to the back of your lesson. You may have to go ahead and use the grid paper that's going to start lesson 2, and that's fine. Just make sure that you get all of this written down. Habitat, niche, competition. Why does competition occur? Because resources are limited. How do organisms get energy? Remember, they either convert energy to food, which means they're a producer. They break down matter to get energy. That means they're a decomposer or a scavenger. Or they eat other organisms, consumers. Okay? And then I'm even going to give you a little bit more detail on those. So hang on. All right, so I ran out of room and I went ahead and used the grid paper that starts lesson 2. Consumers, remember, are organisms that eat other organisms to get their energy. And we talked about 3 different types of consumers. Herbivores that eat only plants, omnivores that eat both plants and animals, and then carnivores, which eat other animals. And then we talked about the predator-prey relationship. The predator is the animal that kills and eats other animals, and the prey is the animal that gets killed and eaten. Okay? All right, so join me for the last little tidbit for lesson 1 in just a second on Screencast 3.